Hello. Okay, so this is welcome to another live stream by Just in Time Worlds, and we are going to hit religion take two this time around. Last time that we live streamed, we did not get through all the talking points of religion. It is a large topic, and understandably so, it can stretch a little bit. So today, the first thing that I want to talk about is sacred texts. And sacred texts is sacred texts are basically the collected writings that are important to your religion, right? So they contain things like the history of your religion, some fables and stories, the morality of your religion. And in our world, there's a myriad examples. Of course, there's the Christian Bible, the Jewish Torah, and so on. But a very interesting example comes to us from Hinduism, which is the Vedas. Now, the Vedas are a collection of ancient scriptures that form the basis for the Hindu philosophy and religion, and there are four of them. The Rig Veda, the Yar Veda, the Sama Veda, and the Atharva Veda. And each of them contains hymns, rituals, and philosophical discourses that kind of guide Hinduism as a religion. But what is notable about about the Vedas is that they changed a lot over the years through interpretation and discussion, and they've spawned many branches. So when we talk about Hinduism today, what we're properly talking about is all of the religions that are based on what is written in the Vedas, but the Vedas have resulted in many branches of Hinduism in the same way that the Christian Bible does. So, I mean, Christianity is a kind of umbrella term, and there's Roman Catholicism and there's Protestantism. I mean, Mormonism has the Bible and its own additional holy book as well. So when you're setting up a holy book in your world, you know, it would make sense that there might be like a central religious truth that is held by the people in these sacred texts, and then that is then dispersed amongst the various sects of your religion, with some of them interpreting that text in different ways. I think that it is also important to consider what goes into the sacred text of yours. There's almost certainly there will be your creation myth. That's almost a given. Any given religion strives to explain how the gods came to be, how humanity came to be, etc. But you're probably also going to have some of your morality in there, and you will undoubtedly have some kind of hymn or praise system in there, like the Psalms in the Bible, or in the Vedas there are hymns, or in the Avesta of Zoroastrianism there are hymns that are attributed to Zoroaster himself. So when you're setting up your sacred texts, and I know, like, for me this is the hardest part, because I am not a poet and I'm not a songwriter. I can't carry a tune in a bucket. So I have no idea how to write a hymn, but try to at least think of titles for hymns, even if you don't actually write the hymn. Remember, you don't have to define all these things in details, but there is probably hymns inside your religious text. There's a really interesting example of sacred text that I want to talk about from fantasy, from science fiction, but same kind of thing, which is the Orange Catholic Bible in Dune. I don't know how many of you know this about Dune, but the Orange Catholic Bible was basically an amalgamation of all of the religious texts in an attempt to find common ground between the various religions, and to get everybody on the same page in terms of following the religion, to get all of humanity on the same page in terms of following the religion. So it's really interesting how Frank Herbert approached that sacred text. He was like, yes, there will still be religion, but we'll find a way to relate to each other. Tenorus made a great point in chat. The chat GTP is pretty good at making random poems out of subject matters. So if you find yourself stuck on a hymn and you're like, I need a hymn of praise to the great God Amber, you can just put the attributes of the god in chat GTP and say, please write me a hymn of praise for this fictional deity. And it should churn out at least something reasonably usable. When I was setting up Magic Falls Religion, the book that I wrote with Drake, that's on pre-sale now, because you have to push merch on these things. So when I was setting up that religion, I had a very interesting situation because that religion is based on a sort of an AI setup. So there's the evil AI that the people of of Shaddao, see as kind of the devil and the enemy, and there's the people of the city who worship an entity called the Builder, that they say defeated the evil AI Helios. And so I had this very kind of computer sciencey based religion. So I ended up calling my script, my writings of that religion, my sacred text of that religion, I ended up calling the ternary, which basically is just a really fancy word that means three, but it's also a computer science notation where you say, if this thing is true, then do that, otherwise do this. It's a ternary operation, a three-part operation. So the reason why I picked that was because of this whole AI drive of the religion, and I felt that it tied back to the basis of the world and the history of the world, which is revealed as people read the book, right? And then when you get to the end and you realize like where you are in the universe and what's going on, you then look back at things like the ternary text, which is the sacred text, and you're like, oh, that's what this stuff is. So when you're putting together your sacred text, think not just of what goes into it, but also what is it called? Is it called something like a Bible? The Orange Catholic Bible is a great example from Dune. It's got a very evocative name that speaks to its purpose. I picked ternary for that reason. As I said, in my Sangwheel books, I have the quartz sheets that form the threesome religion sacred text that they write on with a magical pen made of diamond in the underground section of the main temple of Magadla. And there they have a great deal of emphasis in the laws and things that have been written onto those sheets, and they speak of things that have been written. This is canon that cannot be broken, and things that have only been said. So these are things that are more loose and that people could break them without committing heresy. So think also in terms of your laws and so on. What would people see as absolute laws, and what would they see as kind of more loose kind of guidelines? Because even in like Christianity today, there are many pieces of the Bible which are not followed even by those who interpret the Bible very literally, because it just doesn't quite fit anymore. So in your sacred text, it would make sense as to think of like what was originally put into it and what do people interpret from it now in the day and age of your world as it currently is. So Also consider the origin of your text. If your gods are real and interfering gods, did they come down and reveal the actual literal truth to people? Or was it a shyster who made this up? Or was it somebody who really believes that the truth was revealed to them, but it's unclear as to whether the truth was actually revealed to them? I mean, even in our world, there's so many different ways in which these revelations came. If you look at the Vedas, they're collected writing over 500 years. The Bible is constructed out of a vast period of times, writing worth. The Book of Mormon was, Joseph Smith said that he found the text of it written on golden sheets out in the desert in Nevada. And he translated it and they wrote it down, and that became the Book of Mormon. So definitely give some thought to where the writings and this collected wisdom that's been written down comes from. And then think about how accessible is it? And this is actually really important, because the Roman Catholic Church kind of dominated the Middle Ages Europe because the Bible was not very accessible. There was no means to easily distribute the text, and very few people could read because there was very little to read. With the advent of the printing press, and I know I beat the drum of the printing press, but man, that piece of technology changed everything. To the level of the internet changed everything for us. That's how much the printing press changed Europe. And when the Bibles became distributed across Europe, that's when you suddenly had the Reformation, and you had other, Protestant sects appearing, and you had Christianity splintering into multiple religions in a very rapid fashion, because people could read the Bible for themselves and they could interpret the Bible for themselves. So if your sacred text is very accessible to people, it is entirely possible that you would have this myriad of sets growing from the text as people read the same words but interpret it in different ways. And then, indeed, how is it interpreted and by whom? Is it the priests exclusively who interpret the holy text? Are there wise men? Is it considered to be something where you need to ascend to like a level of wisdom and then you can be a teacher of the sacred texts? Give some thought to how that interpretation happens, and when it is accepted as kind of a mainstream interpretation of the text, and when it would be seen as a fringe or cultish interpretation of the text. You can get quite a lot of world building just out of the sacred text by, putting in some cults in play around the sacred text, people with strange interpretations that are not part of the mainstream interpretations, and so on. And then in setting up your religion, so Marinan asks, so if my setting is set in, say, a period analogous to the very early 1900s, or at least Victorian Edwardian era, yet has both polytheism and monotheism, they wonder how these religions would get along. So I think that it very much depends on, so for example, Christianity actually got on okay with polytheism at the beginning. It wasn't as though Christianity started out from a position of power. In fact, there was a long period of time where Christianity and the Norse gods were worshipped at the same time. But the selling point for Christianity was the afterlife, and that Christianity didn't make promises about today, and that you could convert into it. Like, you can't convert into a religion where you have to be born into it, right? So, and I think that is one of the, and like, I'm not an expert on this, so don't take my word for it, but I think that is one of the reasons why Christianity spread, whereas religions like the Norse religion and so on died out, because these religions were not religions that you converted into. You were born to these gods, and these gods smiled particularly on these people. The Norse gods smiled on the Norse people. The Greek gods smiled on the Greek people, and so on. Whereas Christianity basically came and said, well, come to me and you will be blessed in the afterlife. And its promises are all in the afterlife, and therefore are, not something subject to scrutiny. So to answer your question, I think that polytheism and monotheism can get along, especially if the monotheists in their heads say something like, actually, those aren't actually gods. They're like, spirits or angels or high beings. In fact, it reminds me a little bit of the setup of the religion in Nigeria, that also went across to America with the slave trade. The name escapes me right now, but basically there is in that religion, there is a creator God. Most of Africa's religions actually have a creator God. So there's a creator God, and then there are the spirits. I think they're called Atvavidyas or something like that. So there are these spirits that are then considered deities, but they're actually not fully considered independent deities. They are still servants of the creator gods. So I think, Marinan, you would quite happily be able to have the two religions get along, depending on how you set up their sacred texts. Of course, if you want them in conflict, that's also easy to do. I mean, ultimately, that's the question, right? Where do you want to go with your story? Do you want conflict, or do you want it to be a homogenous relationship? Because you can make it work either way. Orishas, that's the one. Thank you. The Yoruba religion. Thank you, Madison. The name completely escaped me there. So if we are looking at rituals and practices, so when you're setting up your religion, this is a really important part. And it's important that you that you at least have some understanding of your rituals and practices, because your characters, if they are religious, these rituals will have an impact on how they think. It will have an impact on their daily lives. It will have an impact on the pattern of their weeks. And this is one of the big things that I think that fantasy authors sometimes fail at, and that is characters that are religious should be religious. They should do the rituals of their religion without embarrassment, without fear of it. Like it is, they feel that this is important for their soul, for their spirit. Of course, they are going to practice these rituals. From our real world examples, of course, there's things like, Christian communions. The Old Norse religion had a ritual called blot, which was a sacrifice to the Norse gods and the spirit of the land. This could involve the sacrifice of animals, and then the participant would then share a meal in which the sacrificial meat was eaten. So kind of, two in one shot. And often these rituals are also about building community between the faithful. Religion is really, really good at building communities. It is an exceptional thing to draw people together because they know that they have at least this thing in common, And religious rituals often involve some kind of shared meal or other shared activity that brings people together in community. So think about that kind of communal activity as well as the private rituals that form the core of your religion. Also think of like bigger rituals like pilgrimages and so on. There is, for example, the Kumbh Mela pilgrimage in Hinduism, which is where hundreds of thousands of Hindus gather to bathe in a sacred river, traditionally the Ganges, and it's believed to cleanse them of their sins and bring spiritual enlightenment. Tinera says, I think the best way to portray a non-preachy religious character is pretend they are a programming or a Star Wars nerd and then substitute Linux Yoda for their religion. Yes. So it is a good way to think of anybody who has got a vested interest in some kind of fandom and transpose that onto a religion. And you'd probably get to kind of where you're thinking of. One of the interesting applications that I've seen of rituals, especially this longer form of ritual, is in Cashil's Dart by Jacqueline Carey. The priests and priestesses of Namaha, before they take their final vows, they have to serve as Namaha, the goddess of desire. They have to serve as a servant of Namaha for a year. Essentially, they serve as sacred prostitutes for a year before becoming fully recognized as priestesses. And this is considered to be an act of devotion and a religious rite of passage in their faith. It's called the servitude of Namaha. So, think about things like that tie into the central thematic theme of your religion. What do your priests have to do to prove that they are worthy of the God's blessing? And think about the evolution of, religious rituals. Like a ritual may start as some sort of, big communal meal, and it may end up as something as simple as, this is as something as simple as the modern Christian communion, which is just a wafer and a glass of red wine. Okay, then symbolism. Yeah, so this is a big one, primarily because it is going to impact the way that your characters speak. So symbolism is basically the things that form your religions, like symbols, their iconography, all of that kind of thing. It's everything from the Om symbol in Hinduism, the cross in Christianity, yin and yang in Taoism, and so on. In fantasy, Warhammer 40k has got the purity seals, which is a great symbol, with a little piece of text and the seal, and you just hammer it on top of anything that's unholy. And there's holy symbols in D&D and so on. Now, I always try and make up at least one personal symbol that my religious characters carry around with them. So in my Sangwheel Chronicles book, I have the religious characters have these bracelets that they wear that have got the Soa charms, the symbolic representation of the threesome gods, as glass charms on their wrists. In Magic Fall, again, because this is all about this mathematical, computerized kind of religion, I took the Fibonacci spiral, but because their principle is, if you exclude AI, if you don't follow the path of AI, then you must introduce an element of chaos to symbolize humanity. So they 3D print a magic a spiral, a Fibonacci spiral that has got one bump out of alignment, and they call that the builder's bump. That is their little bit of chaos in the perfection of the Fibonacci spiral. Kit says the other side of the coin of forming community is a way to separate your community from unbelievers through dress, diet, and language. Absolutely, yes. So this is where the kind of societal control comes in of religion. And like, I'm not painting this as all religions are evil, so please don't misunderstand me here. But there is very definitively a kind of, this is us, the saved people, or the people upon whom, the God or gods smile. And that is the other people upon whom the gods do not smile. And the things that separate us from them reside in our dress, these charms that we wear, what we eat, etc. In fact, the reason why pigs got it so hard in the Torah is because the Canaanites ate pigs at the time when the tribes of Judea were documenting the Bible. I did a video on that way back when. And essentially, pigs made it onto the forbidden list to separate the Jewish people from their enemies, the Canaanites, who were seen as pig eaters. So it very much can be like a differentiation between us and them in terms of your symbology and what what people wear and so on. So in terms of your symbology, use it to underlie key aspects of your religion. If it's a warlike faith, the symbol should be a weapon. If it's a nature-based deity, you could pick a plant or an animal, like my magic fall little spiral thing. Think about how that symbol is used in religious practices. Do people pray with it? Is it seen as a representation of their soul? Is it part of a manhood or adulthood ceremony where they move from, a child to adult by forging the symbol, for example? And think about how that symbol impacts their language. Like, we have sayings in English, like, it is my cross to bear. That saying comes 100% from the fact that Christianity is the dominant religion in the English-speaking world. So think about how those symbols and how the way that the gods are represented will impact your idioms and expressions among the people who follow this religion. So once you've got your symbol, I find it easier to go, once I've got the symbol, to move from there to the expressions. So once I had the spiral in Magic Fall, it was easy to go, okay, so we can talk about finding grace in the builder's fragments as, making the best of a bad situation. And things like embrace the chaos, finding an opportunity in, when everything is going to hell around you, finding an opportunity to move forward and things like that. So I find it easier to go from the symbol to the expressions. I guess if you have a really great expression, you could work backwards to the symbol, but I think that could get a little weird. Okay. Then religious conflict. So not all religions have to be in conflict. And in fact, often the worst religious conflicts are between religions of the same sects. For example, the 30 Years' War from 1618 to 1648 was a war was a war in Europe that was fueled between Catholics and Protestant states. And it basically fragmented the Holy Roman Empire. It was one of Europe's most destructive wars, even for Europe, and Europe, is the PvP server of the world. Even for Europe, it was a heinous conflict. And it was driven by the Holy Roman Emperor being a Catholic, and some of his dukes being Protestants. And then Sweden got involved, and the king there was a Protestant, and it just kind of escalated and spread out over the whole of Europe, made worse by the fact that there was also a famine at the time. Fun times. If anyone ever asks you if you want to live in any other period than now, it's not worth it. You'd probably end up in the 30 Years' War. Anyway, then there are conflicts that involve religion, but aren't necessarily driven by religion. So an example of this is the Yellow Turban Rebellion, which was a civil war that took place in China from 184 to 205 AD. And it was led by Taoist followers who wore yellow scarves around their heads, hence the name Yellow Turban Rebellion. But it wasn't driven by religion. It was just that religious leaders took charge of the rebellion. The rebellion was rooted in the fact that there was a lot of suffering and social disasters and physical disasters going on in China at that time, and these Taoist leaders said, okay, the Han, who were the imperial family at the time, have lost the mandate of heaven, and they led this rebellion. So religion was involved, and it gave legitimacy to the rebellion, but it was not the driving force of the rebellion, if you understand the difference. We've got some great examples from fantasy for conflict between religions. American Gods, of course, by Neil Gaiman. You have the old gods, the old Norse gods who, don't want to lose their place to the new gods who've been who've arisen out of our current culture and so on. Then Trudy Canavan wrote this great series called The Age of the Five, in which there's the Circlean religion and the Pentadarians. And these two are in conflict with each other. And this whole conflict between them is a very, very central part of the story's plot. I won't spoil it for anyone, but it is very interesting. And then in Guy Gabriel Kay's Song for Urbon, the religious conflict between the worshippers of the sun god and the worshippers of the moon goddess is extremely central to the plot, where you have people directly, the sun god militant faith guys attacking, the sunshine and roses court of the moon goddess. So there's some really good examples if you want to look for fantasy conflict for religion. Not at all, William. And welcome to the live stream. So when you're creating religious conflict in your world, think about whether this is it like the Yellow Turban Rebellion, where you have a situation where there is a conflict that is being led by and supported by religion, but it is not as though the religion directly is involved. It's not a conflict about religion, it's a conflict supported by religion. Or is it a conflict about religion? Is it like the 30 Years' War, which was ignited because of this Protestant Catholic thing? Or like the Crusades is another example, or the Song for Urbon, if you look at the Guy Gabriel Kay setup. So think about that those two different types of religious conflicts that you can have. And then think about which people are using this conflict. I mean, yes, I'm certain that many of the kings and crowned heads of Europe did feel very strongly about Protestantism and Catholicism. I also think that many of them did basically use the upheaval of the religion for their own purposes. I don't think that Henry VIII created the Church of England for like pious reasons. I think he did it because he didn't want to be under control of the Pope. Like, so think about who is using the religion and who devoutly believes, because there will absolutely be people who devoutly believe whether you have interfering gods or not. And then we did speak a little bit about the societal control aspects in terms of religion forming communities. Absolutely, religion will try and paint an in-group and an out-group. But there's also more direct examples. Like the Pope blessed kings' reigns because they were born to the throne. And so the divine right of kings was very much rooted in religion saying, yes, these are the legitimate kings. And in, like, for example, in George R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire, the faith of the Seven exercises considerable influence over the population of Westeros, to the point where the Targaryen kings had banned the militant part of the faith, the sparrows, and it was only when Cersei needed them on her side that she allowed that militant faith to be reinstated. I kind of wonder two things. One, I wonder if she really had any choice because the faith had clearly been rising. But also, two, I wonder if she regretted that. I would have regretted that if I were in her shoes during that walk. Definitely during that walk. And we can see very much there societal control being exercised, where we have a queen being punished by the church, showing us very clearly the dominance of the church over the power of the throne in the world of Game of Thrones. And yeah, William Blowers makes the point that Henry VIII needed a divorce. And, he got a divorce when he made himself head of his own religion. Frank Herbert's Dune, the Bene Gesserit, were very, very good at controlling the population. And their control was very subtle. They layered in these like messianic kind of prophecies so that if their members were stranded outside of, their places of control, well, they could just tap into this messianic prophecy, and that would allow them to basically be safe within that. So that is a very, very long game to play. I mean, it is good, don't get me wrong, but you need a very long playing religion to put in place such a control mechanism. William asks, would you say it's best to have religion and gods be real, or have it be ambiguous if ever touched as to whether the objects of faith are real? William, I'm in two minds of that, but I think in general it depends on the story you're telling. Like in Sangwheel, my gods are real, but they're not what you think. And in Magic Fall, obviously there is an AI, and so on. So to an extent, I like working with real gods because it's interesting to me to explore from that perspective. But I think it depends on the story you want to tell. If the story you want to explore does not have anything to do with the gods being real or not, if the gods are not involved in your story, then I'd leave it ambiguous. Not because, you should define it or you shouldn't define it, but because you might want to have them be real or fake at some point in the story. So leaving it ambiguous gives you that freedom to decide later if you don't need to make that decision up front. So that would be my approach. I'm always of the opinion of really lay down in stone only what you need to tell the story and keep the rest a little bit open in case you find yourself in a position where you need to define the story at a later stage. Okay, that was 40 minutes of live streaming. There is a merch store now to check out if you guys want some cool merch. There's even some meme stuff based on the vote. Let me know if you want any specific types of merch. Our next live stream will be about economics, I think was on the poll. And then after that, we'll see. And yeah, please like, share, tell people about the channel, do all of those YouTube things. Oh, and do click on some other video on my channel if you can, if you have the time. YouTube really likes it when you go from one video to another. It gets all like warm and fuzzy inside and, boosts the channel and so on. Thanks very much for tuning in, guys. I hope you enjoyed the second video on religion, and I will see you in 2 weeks for another live stream.